Well, here we are in our next episode, our next Firefighter Support Peer Podcast. Today we're here with Brent Ho, our peer team chaplain, and Seth Weaver, our highly qualified peer team member from the South.
There he is.
So what we wanted to talk a little bit about today is the balance of spirituality and the fire service. And I think where we're, in one sense, kind of the heart of small town Utah, I think a lot of guys are brought up with a spiritual background. But man, I can certainly speak for myself and others that once you get into this service and you start seeing certain things, it kind of rocks that boat a little bit. And so Brent has spent 30 plus years with Boise Fire and has ready to answer every single question we have. No, just kidding.
I'll give an answer. It may not be the one you want to hear, but I'll give an answer.
Yeah, so tell us just a little bit from your experience, kind of what either you would do or just kind of how you found that balance or were trying to achieve that balance in your career as a firefighter, still maintaining a healthy spiritual aspect to your life.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me here, and Seth for staying in contact with me and allowing me this opportunity. And I do definitely look forward to having conversations with guys and gals or whomever on the department or within the community to try to find that balance. And do I say I have it perfectly dialed down? No, I don't. But a verse in the Bible that I go to quite a lot, and maybe a lot of the individuals who are listening to this would have a good understanding of what Romans 8:28 says. And for those that don't, it's no big deal, but it says that God works out everything to those for the good of those that believe. So what does that look like? So in my life, I believe that it is God. I believe that he is all powerful and I'm not him. Since I believe that, and even though there are some horrible things that are going on in the world, not only on the other side of the world, but there are hard, difficult, stressful, straining, painful things that happen here within Cache Valley, and specifically here in Logan City. So the way that I understand that verse is, since I believe that there is a God, and since I believe that he is all good, even though there are things that I don't understand, even though that I know that there are things that I don't agree with, I can see the pain, I can see the hurt, I can see the trauma that occurs. Somehow, God is going to work those things out for his good. It's not necessarily for my good, but it's for his good. And since I believe that he is all good, there is an ultimate good purpose for those things that occur. Now, that's going to open up a whole bunch of other cans of worms that are out there for conversation. But through that one verse, I believe that that gives me assurance that though I don't know what's going on, though I don't understand everything that's going on, God does have my best interests and those who believe in him as a priority.
Yeah. No, I think you showed just something there just right out of the gate, which I think is awesome, is that I think to maintain a healthy spiritual aspect to your life, you have to have a pretty defined role of what that higher being, be it God, the universe, nature, whatever somebody's kind of been leaning on. But the more defined you have that role for that higher entity, I think the easier it is to have that relationship and to figure out, right, as those bumps in the road come along or those tough calls. It seems like in my own life, as that picture of God or whatever has been vague, well, it's pretty tough to watch some child suffer on a call or have some terrible thing done, and then you have this vague understanding of God or that higher being. And yeah, it almost seems impossible to reconcile. But, having a go-to verse or just this clearly defined role, I think certainly probably helps bring that spirituality into that reconciliation to feel good about, okay, I did just see this. However, I know who God is, and I don't understand everything about what I just saw, but I do understand this part of God. And so I'm okay with that, and I'm going to move on and hopefully figure it out, or I'm okay with allowing him to, like you said, be in charge of, and good thing I'm not in charge and trying to figure all this out. But I think one thing too that just came to mind while you're talking is, because I think no one is unaware that there's bad things happening in the world. I think what happens to firefighters, and especially in smaller towns like Logan, is, man, it just brings it right home. There's people suffering in other countries, there's terrible wars and all these things happening. But man, when you see somebody in your own neighborhood virtually do something evil or terrible to somebody else, or just, something like a sickness or a car accident that wasn't anybody's fault. It's just a terrible thing, but it happens at the intersection you drive through every day. Or, like I said, your neighbor's house, and that all of a sudden now I think brings to the forefront some of those spiritual questions that maybe you don't want to tackle until something like that's presented. Turn to Seth for a minute. Seth, you grew up in the South, and tell us a little bit about your background, maybe if you're willing, just some of the questions that you've had and
for sure.
kind of being in the service.
So my background comes a little bit different too. I was raised in the Bible Belt of the South. So my papa was a Baptist preacher. My dad was raised Baptist. My mom was Catholic, came out of Canada, and then they met and became Mormon. And so I've kind of got a pretty diverse background of religions there. A lot of my extended family are still part of those devout faiths. And then being raised Mormon in the Bible Belt, I went to Pentecostal churches, Baptist churches. I feel like I've seen a lot of beliefs in a lot of different ways. But that kind of gave me a good foundation, because whenever I got into the fire service, I started having my questions as well. I think like we all do, started seeing some of these terrible things happen, bringing them home, started having difficulties at home, a lot of anger, and I had to try to figure things out. And I think the thing that helped me the most is having that clear definition of God. Like you said, it brought me back to love, and it brought me back to a loving Father. And I was able to take that from all these different religions. It didn't matter what religion they came from. The thing they had in common was a belief that love was this greatest power, that love conquered all, and that it didn't matter how evil or bad or terrible these things were. You continue to love each other, and you can overcome anything. And so I think coming from that diverse background, I haven't been, just kind of stuck in one little bubble, only knowing one religion, but be able to see many different ones help me realize, between the good and evil, we don't need to fight between ourselves, because love is going to conquer all.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and it reminded me of something when I first started in the fire service. My dad was a seminary teacher for 37 years, so that's a little bit of my background. But that was one of my first questions: is, man, how on earth could God let this happen? And especially after my first kind of big call. But I will never forget what he said. But it's kind of right along those lines. It was, that we don't always understand why God allows or certain things to happen, or we don't understand all the aspects of the suffering. But what we do know is that God can heal it. Yeah. That there isn't anything that he can't heal. And anyways, that's always kind of stuck with me. But that kind of love conquers all, that God's love, no matter what happens and all the questions that surround a horrific thing. But the love, the healing is never out of reach, no matter how it feels in that moment.
On that, I didn't expect to kind of get deep, and especially this early, but a little bit more at that is, I experienced a really bad call that kind of pushed me over my edge at one point in my career that involved children. Started heavily drinking after that, because it kind of numbed it. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't taking care of myself. Disassociated from my wife to the point where she was ready to leave me. Not spending time with my kid. I went down a pretty dark hole. I've shared this with some of the guys in the department. I don't mind sharing it. But I remember I got to a point where I thought so little of myself. One night I had my gun in my lap, and I was ready to take my own life, because I felt nobody could love me. And that all this going on in the world, I was just, part of the language, I was a piece of shit. That was it. I'm done. Everybody'd be better off without me. And luckily enough, I didn't do it that night. That next morning I broke down and I went out for help. And I remember reconciling with God, realizing that I was never alone during that time. But just like with my own son, whenever he falls, I can't go pick him up every time. Instead, I stand back and I stand there and say, hey, whenever you're ready, come to me and I'll help you. I'll give you a hug. That's what he was doing to me at that point, is that he was waiting on me to get up and come back to him and say, hey, need some help here. He didn't leave me alone. He never left me alone. And that's helped me ever since then. I go to a terrible call. I realize these things happen, but God didn't leave those people alone. He didn't leave me alone. He's just waiting for them to turn to him. He can't step in and help us every moment of the way. We are beings that make our own choices, and I'm grateful for that. I get to make my own choice on what I choose with my life. He's not going to force me to do anything, but he's always there waiting for us to turn back and say, hey, you know, I'm here and I need some help. So that's something that's helped me great throughout my career. Whenever I got to deal with these issues, is like, hey, you know what? They had the choice. God's going to handle that. He was always there for him, just like he's there for me. And that's been a good thing for me.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Seth.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's really great for you to be able to share stuff like that, because I think to one degree or another, I think everybody's felt that. And if you don't mind me asking a couple of questions about that, but just what kind of time frame did that span? You know, like to go from maybe that call to that point, you know, is that a quick thing? Was that years, months?
Well, it's one of those things I thought happened pretty quickly, but once I got in therapy and started talking and started working through, I realized that I had calls 5-6 years previous that built up. I never took care of them, and so everything kept stacking one on top of the other. And then I finally had that one call that tipped me over, and that was it. I didn't care anymore, and it just pushed me over the edge. And so that's why I tell people, like, hey, if you're having those little thoughts now, in the blink of an eye, you're going to be down that wormhole. So it's better to go in and get help and start to talk about these things now, because you'd be surprised how quick it happens. Like, I didn't even realize I'd gotten that bad. But once I kind of climbed out of that hole and I started looking back, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, I see this now. And I see this and this and this. And it was all a progress that I was so disassociated I never even realized. Like, you know, I was at one point in time, you know, maybe a casual drinker. And then I turned to, like, looking back, I was like, when did I start drinking at 9 a.m. on my days off and kept it going all day, you know? Like, when did that happen? When did I start repeating in my head constantly to myself, hey, you're just a piece of shit. Nobody cares about you. Like, it all came on so slow and suddenly until I was so involved in it, it had me wrapped. And I was down and out, you know? That's what I try to tell people, like, watch for the signs, because you think it's a one-time moment, but yet it can keep happening and rolling. So, you know, your check engine light comes on. You don't want to wait until the motor blows up. It comes on. You want to say, hey, something's going on. I better go get it looked at real quick. And so that's something I would urge others to look forward to, too, is like, we think these calls don't matter. The calls that she brought up with me during therapy, I didn't think really mattered until I started putting the pieces together with her. Like, oh, yeah, they did. They were just that small piece in the whole puzzle, but it was a part of it. And, you know, I never even realized it.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect for you to mention that, because it kind of normalizes, I think, what other guys are feeling. But then also, and maybe Brent, you can talk to this a little bit, we don't have to wait for that one big moment, that big wake-up call where we realize, oh my gosh, why have I got myself here? What are some things that we can do early on if you do start to notice some of those signs, to know that, you know, you don't have to wait to access God's love until it gets so bad, you know, you've hit rock bottom? But what can you do along the way to maybe prevent from even getting to rock bottom, but you start to see some of those early warning signs Seth was talking about?
So I think good, open, honest, transparent conversations need to happen sooner the better. And for that to happen, you got to have trust. Whether it's with the guys who you're sitting around the table with having dinner, whether it's going to be day off and you're on the bank fishing, or you're up on a hike somewhere, you're doing something, somehow at some point a person has to make a conscious decision to talk and open up and not try to be this, you know, Schwarzenegger physique of an, I'm impervious, you know, you can't hurt me. I mean, there's too many guys that I'm sure all of us have seen, and I've seen it in my life. And so when I say that I've seen it in my life, I'm third generation firefighter. And so my grandfather, my dad, and then me. And I've seen in the past, I didn't really understand it so much when I was an adolescent and then a teenager. But then being on the department, seeing, I mean, my eyes just being really opened into a new world. And then God getting a hold of me and shaking me up when I was 35 and being called into a proper relationship with him, then I started seeing things a lot differently. So if you can imagine this illustration. So I like using a lot of alliterations, acrostics, acronyms to help us remember things, right? We're in the fire service. We got to remember how to do certain things. We come up with these stupid little rhymes, you know, to help us remember that we get the pump stopped, we get the pump into gear, we switch from road to pump. We're going through and getting our calculations and whatever the officer is doing, considering procedures and operations. We've got these mental images in our mind of how to help us get through a particular situation. So the same thing needs to be, if we take an emergency scene serious, we should take a personal emergency seriously as well. So being able to recognize those signs. And so imagine these two trees, if you will. One tree, nice and beautiful, and I don't care what kind of fruit, whether it's mangoes or apples or whatever kind of fruit you like, right? Good, healthy tree. This other one is not such a good tree. So what can we reasonably presume is happening below the surface?
One's getting nutrition, one's not.
One's getting nutrition and one's not. So with an individual, if there is some type of patterned behavior that you see bad fruit, I'm not saying that any one of you guys got bad fruit, but what I'm just trying to say is you see something, you recognize something in the individual. Well, it's got to be because something else more deep-seated is happening. So I believe, and like I was mentioning earlier in our time together, I believe that the heart is the power engine for the think tank and the speak motor. So what comes out, what happens up here, generates from here. So if I am a tree and my nutrition is not producing fruit that would be lovely, that would be honoring, that would be caring, that would have compassion, that would have anything that would resemble that, then it's probably bad fruit. Well, I got to address the root system. So each one of us is having pressure, some kind of pressure of some sort. Family, finances, education, career, you name it. Everybody's experiencing this pressure. And this pressure is going to cause us to circulate in a manner that we produce bad fruit, or we recognize it and we're understanding it, and how does it help me to produce good fruit. So when we have these stressful times, and so not that I'm just going to pick on you, but you opening right up, and there were other things that were going on in your life, and obviously you've gotten some assistance to help you understand what was going on in your mind that was causing you to say, speak, think, do whatever coming from within you that was caused and presented itself in not so good fruit. Right? 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm cracking a beer. Whatever it is, sitting down, and I'm just sitting there and I'm staring at the wall and I'm thinking, I'm a piece of crap. I'm just going to use this 9 and take care of it right now. Right? And so all these things, they're adding up and they're building up and they're causing a person to spiral to a degree out of control. Not that you're completely out of control, but
I was there.
Well, it's all right. I don't know if he's ever come back out.
I'm still spiraling, just a different direction now.
So, I mean, the whole thing is that if I think that I truly have control over myself, I'm fooling myself. I mean, because I like to think that, and as type A individuals and people who are in the emergency services, we're supposed to make normalcy out of that which is abnormal. There is a horrible situation. We've got to try to bring it under control. Right? So it's ingrained in us because just of our nature relative to the job that we do. So how then do I change my thinking, change my mind, change my heart, so when I see something and I recognize it, how do I try to help the person to understand what are those pressures that cause the thoughts, that bring about these motivations, these desires, that manifest itself that is in a unhealthy way. And I believe that through the Bible, through Scripture, that I can at least help provide some guidance and direction. So a portion of the Bible that I tend to go to quite a lot in these situations is the 4th chapter of Ephesians. So if you haven't done any reading in the New Testament, or you don't read the New Testament, that's fine, but it's 6 chapters. The first 3 chapters are how God has called you. Are this, you are chosen, you are one of mine, this is what you are. He's indicating to you what you are. And once you come to that understanding of what you are, if in fact you believe that there is a God, and if you believe that he is all good, now chapters 4, 5, and 6 is how you should start living that out. So in the 4th chapter, it's got this real, it's a fulcrum, if you will. It's switched about, here you are, here you are, here you are. Now here is how you should be acting. So it's the put off of the old man to put on the new man. What does it look to put off those thoughts, those emotions, those desires that bring about bad fruit? What brings about good fruit? And throughout that conversation, it's to realize, so again, you got these 2 trees, right? So imagine that this tree that's got dead limbs, no nothing, and this farmer comes up and starts stapling apples to these dead limbs. And he turns and looks at you and says, look at my nice tree. You're going to look at him and kind of scratch your head and, man, what country are you from, right? What planet are you from? So we as individuals, we try to address the outer appearance. If I just change the way I look, if I just change the way I behave, if I just change the outer appearance, then that's going to cause me to become better. But it's not taking care of what's already inside of us. And I believe that trying to slowly have those conversations with people to recognize what are those triggers, what are those pressures that are causing you to bring about bad fruit. And once it gets to the point you recognize it, and the sooner that you can practice on yourself, so to speak, and the sooner you can recognize, oh, I don't want to go this direction, I want to go this direction, and I want to change my thought pattern. And it's based on a little rhyme that I've said before, is there's always two choices that are on the shelf, either pleasing God or pleasing self. And too many of the times I want to please myself. I want to do what I want to do. I want to do what makes me feel good. I want to do these things and that I have a strong emotional desire to accomplish. Where if I think, what is it that God wants me to do? Does he really want me to A, B, C, X, Y, Z? And that slowly, I think, can help a person to address the root problem so that it manifests a better fruit.
Yeah. I think you bring up a great point with that, because I think if we're truly honest with ourselves, when it's just you and your thoughts, or
that's a tough conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're truly honest in that situation, though, bad fruit when you see it, or you feel it growing, right? We may try to do things to put on the facade when we're around other people, but I think in those moments when you're truly honest and you know if you're being the kind of person you wanted to be, or that God wants you to be, you can recognize that. And I think that's almost like an instinct that everybody has, in that moment, if you're willing to be honest. And I think we can lie to ourselves for a long period of time too. You can, and convince yourself otherwise, unless you get to those moments that you just start, recognizing that. I think it's in that moment, though, then what do you do to start turning that around, right? And I think that's where I think with firefighters, it's not always this choice of, do I love God or hate God? Sometimes the easier choice is, I just don't believe in God. It's easier for me to do what I do, to see what I see, and I don't want to keep trying to answer all these questions about God. It's easier just to believe there isn't one, or I don't want to address those questions now, so I kick that down the road. But then again, if you're in that moment when you're really honest with yourself, I think a lot of us want to believe that there is something else. There is a higher purpose, and so I don't know. It's a tough thing, but I think the easiest route we take is not necessarily one stance of one or the other. It's a lot of times it's just right down the middle, because that's the easiest. It's the path of least resistance, right?
Yeah, I could say I could probably kind of fall into that category a little bit more, just to kind of highlight differences between Brent and I. The first time we talked, while I believe in God, everybody who's been around me knows I may not be the best example of that. I do have that potty mouth, and I make some jokes that sometimes raise eyebrows to certain people. I'm going, sorry, that's just what it is. While you look at Brent, Brent is a very outstanding man who you can look at him and know, like, hey, he represents God in his fullness. And I feel like me, while I believe in God, it's my belief. I have that personal relationship with him, and I'm constantly working on that to try to get better. And beforehand, it was very simple to say either I do or I don't, all in or nothing. And once I developed that relationship with God, I understood he accepts me for who I am, and my getting better every day looks different than Brent's and with yours. And so I'm comfortable with that now. I'm comfortable knowing, like, other people might look at me and say, hey, he's, a little off or a little different. But yet I know, like, God's proud of my progress today. He's proud of those steps I made to be a little bit better today than I was yesterday. And so that's kind of what I hold on to whenever I'm thinking about that relationship. Like, I may not be, like, all in and all believing, but I do believe in him, and I'm figuring out the rest, just trying to be a little bit better every day. Well, I can look at Brent, and we're probably going to have some disagreements on the things I do with my life at certain times in my life, but yet we can maintain that love and that relationship and still have conversations around the table.
Yeah. Yeah. You look back on history, and probably even within this generation specifically, you can go back and search plenty of different YouTube videos that are out there, and you can have two people that could not be further apart from one another on a belief of God, and they'll still have a respectful conversation, and they'll leave. I mean, they still don't agree with each other, but they'll shake each other's hand and they'll be cordial. One in particular, was it Hitchens? I can't remember if it was Hitchens or Dawkins. One of the two of them's having a conversation with a pastor up in a church from northern Idaho. And they didn't agree with each other, but they talked back and forth, and they were respectful of how they addressed one another, and, again, some healthy banter back and forth, and they giggled a bunch of times in the conversation, but they were respectful. So if one of the three of us have a differing view, which I'm sure we do, about who is that higher being, what is that higher authority? Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you think. Let's talk about what I think. And at some point, whether we still disagree or not, irrelevant. Let's still be open and honest. And I still want to have that open, trusting doorway that someone's going to maybe disagree, but we can still talk. We can go up skiing. We can go out hunting. We can go for a hike. We can go out and play golf. We can still enjoy each other's company. The two of you, I see you as image bearers of God, and because of such, I'll treat you with respect and value and dignity. And I would, whether or not you give me the reciprocal treatment is irrelevant. It's how I treat those who are around me. God tells us plenty of times in Scripture, don't just love those who are around you that are lovely. And we're told to love our enemy. I don't consider you guys an enemy, but even if there was somebody who was an enemy who was sitting in this room, I'm still supposed to love them in the same manner in which Christ has commanded me to do.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, because the way we interact with each other, I think, is ultimately, if there is a measurement for how we feel about God, it's manifested in how we treat each other.
Yeah.
I don't know how somebody that believes in a loving God could go and be a jerk, and we all have our moments, of course, but we're not perfect. But if the goal is, man, I just want to be better at treating humans and fellow humans better, like that's my goal in life, then I think it's hard to go wrong with that. But the moment we get too caught up in maybe some of the details that you disagree with people on, then all of a sudden those details become more important than the person, right? And so I think that was well said. I also brought up, I think, understanding our role, so we talked about at the beginning, kind of defining that higher being's role, be it whatever it is, God or nature or the universe. I think we're all in a similar belief in a God here, but defining that role, but also what's our role within that, right? If there is this God out there and they have this role to spread love and help heal suffering and to help us be better, well, then what's my part in that, right? And I think, Brent, you said it earlier too, with the two options we have. We can do something to serve ourselves or something to serve God. And so if we understand what our service to God looks like, well, that gives us a whole new purpose in life, right? That if you do have one of those tough calls that are hard to see and hard to sleep at night with, but all of a sudden you don't only understand God's role in that, but you understand your own personal role and what you can do to help people begin that healing, or, even if it's your crew members, with us, we rarely get to interact with the patient after the call, but you see the hurt that it puts on other crew members, and there's an opportunity there to help them begin the healing process and in a way kind of be that instrument in God's hands or the universe. Or again, I want to keep it fairly general to those that maybe view things a little differently, but if you believe that you have a role in assisting God in the healing, then man, I just think there's nothing more kind of rejuvenating than being able to be a part of that and help others kind of start that path of healing and joy. So one other thing that I wanted to address on our topics today is when it comes to religion, especially I think within our department in our area, which we live here, is not only having a healthy relationship with your spirituality, with God, but I think there's a certain culture and balance that has to be found with your chosen religious denomination. What does that look like? Because I think a lot of people that are brought up, Baptist or LDS or anything else, sometimes you're so deeply ingrained in that culture that in some ways it can become unhealthy until you figure out what that balance is, right? And Seth, you mentioned, just starting to be okay with where you're at and knowing you're trying to progress to this level, or you're just working on stuff, but being okay with the fact that, I don't have to look exactly like this member of my congregation looks to be loved by God or to be considered a saint or whatever.
Yeah, or
right?
just a good person.
Yeah. The standards that we
like,
kind of can sometimes measure ourselves by can be a hard relationship to balance. And so, I don't know, maybe Brent, you can speak to that a little bit too, is just having been involved with your congregation and kind of what does a healthy relationship with your chosen church kind of look like?
A common phrase that any one of our pastors at our church says from the pulpit or wherever that they might happen to be is we gather and we scatter. So we gather on Sundays. I believe that we're commanded to do that. And I use Hebrews chapter 10, I believe it's verses 19 to 24, especially toward the end there, toward 24. And that we are to, and I'm paraphrasing, we are to actively come together as a body of believers. We're not supposed to stay at home. We shouldn't be just watching a televised Zoom meeting or whatever it is. We are to come together and to congregate. But then we're supposed to be the seed because we are the hands and feet of Christ's words, and we're supposed to scatter. So gather and scatter. Wherever you happen to be, scatter. Scatter the seed. Scatter the word. Preach about who he is. Now, I don't want to come off and be somebody that I'm going to be some street preacher. I'm standing on the corner and I've got a sandwich board on my chest that says, the end of the world is coming, and be one of those individuals. I do believe that the end of the world is coming at some point, but that's not my focus. My focus is what I've been given a charge to do is to speak what I believe is truth. And how that comes across is supposed to be, like I'm going to say it over and over, is in a loving, honoring, humble, compassionate way in which I can have a good, open and honest, transparent dialogue and conversation with any person, regardless if they have no belief in God or a very strong belief or anywhere in between. And I believe that will also manifest itself very similar to in the New Testament. I think about the gospel account according to Matthew, chapter 22. It gets into a time frame to where a bunch of the religious leaders are asking Christ a lot of questions. And they're saying, all right, well, are we supposed to pay taxes to Caesar? And, so some type of political question. And you look at our country today, they're all asking all kinds of political questions. And then the next one, comes up and says, well, this man was married to, or this woman was married to a man, that man died, and she married all of his brothers, Well, now who's she going to be married to in the afterlife? Well, it's a social. And what do we got going on now? A lot of social questions. It's the book of Ecclesiastes is very clear in that there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that they experienced back then, we're still experiencing now, except we've got smartphones to do it. And we're just point and click, and Google's helping us trying to figure out all this stuff. So after all these questions are being asked, a lawyer asks him, what's the greatest commandment? And it's a bit of a trap because, one who has studied the Hebraic law, there's more than just 10 commandments. There's over 600 commandments. And they're trying to weigh, what's the heaviest one? What's the greatest one? And he goes right back to the Old Testament, exactly what the lawyer would expect. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. For a bonus question, he gives them the second commandment, and that is to love your neighbor as yourself. And if I keep those two things at the forefront of my mind, if I keep those two things at the beginning of how I pray for an individual, how I enter into the conversation and see that, wow, Seth's got a lot of pressures going on. Brent's got a lot of pressures going on him, and trying to figure out and trying to understand what are these pressures that he's having, that either of you or any person is going through. How do I lovingly work through those and stay into that good conversation with them so that when we may have a differing understanding of who God is, at least we can come out and say, all right, you may not think that you're a religious person, but you're worshiping something. And I just got to figure out through how they answer the question what that is.
Yeah. And I think that is a fantastic example from the Bible. It's been something that over my own journey that I've fallen back to that exact same thing. And I think sometimes I tell myself, man, I just want to be so busy loving God and loving my neighbor that I don't even have time to worry about the other commandments. Like they're all less than those two things. And if I can figure out how to do those or devote all my time and attention to those two things, I just hope God will forgive me if I mess up the other 598, but I just want to really get good at those, and I think ever since I've kind of taken a little bit different stance and just try to focus on the core, because I think how many of us are like that lawyer, and that, sometimes I think, maybe the lawyer, and, just as you can try to imagine the circumstance, what if he was trying to initially trap Christ in a question, but maybe there's a little frustration there too. He knows all these commandments, and it's hard to keep up with them all. And how often do we all feel like that, right? Like, man, I'm a terrible person. I can't do any of the commandments. I'm just terrible, and we use our religious denomination as a vehicle for shame and guilt. And what a terrible train wreck, that we have this opportunity to gather and worship together, and we just come away with feeling like, man, well, I'm just more shameful and guilty than I've ever been, versus, and so I kind of like to, when I read that story, I like to think maybe the lawyer was coming at it from that, this has been nothing but, and he's put that on others. He's measured others by their ability to keep those commandments, right? But then, at least in Mark's version of the story, after the Savior answers that question, he takes the lawyer and the lawyer agrees with him, and he says, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And I love that and that's what it kind of gave you that hope that, man, I'm going to be okay. If I just focus on those two things, but I get other things wrong, I think God's going to be okay with me.
Yeah.
And just seem to alleviate this unnecessary pressure that sometimes comes. And I don't think a lot of the times by any fault of any particular denomination, but just what we kind of bring on ourselves. And if we really want to be close to God and that kingdom of God and just focus on those two things, I think, man, there's a lot of peace that comes along with the pursuit of just those two commandments.
I think you're right. So I have 4 brothers, and I have this one brother at the age of 15, got his associate's degree, just was an outstanding school kid, always listened to mom and dad, he's been really good his whole life. I'm kind of jealous of it, but now he's an attorney and, he's doing really well. And we joke with my dad that that's his favorite child because of all those things he does. But in the reality of it is, my dad loves us all, and he loves us all equally, even though, because he knows all of us are just trying our best. Now, my best and his best are very different. Like, I didn't graduate high school, and yet here's this guy at the age of 15, like, associate's degree, getting into college early, all this kind of stuff. And so that's where I kind of feel like with God, too, like, as long as we're trying our best, we're putting that best foot forward, it doesn't matter where each one of us are, that he's going to love us the same.
Yeah, and I hope
that's going to get us into that kingdom of heaven because we're all trying our best no matter where we are.
I hope that the listening audience really listened to what you were just saying right there, because we shouldn't, and we fall into the trap. We want to compare ourselves so much to what everybody else is doing, right? But in Colossians, in chapter 3, or in verse 17 and verse 23, there's a similar statement that's there. And it's whatever you do, whether you're good at pounding nails or you're good at pounding the pavement or name it, everywhere in between, whatever you do it heartily as though to God and not to man. I'm not here to impress you guys. I'm not here to make myself look better. I shouldn't be making myself look better. I mean, if anything, Christ gives me the example and says, I didn't come here to be served, but I came here to serve. So if anything, I should submit and that looks weird to the watching world. That seems very odd. Like, what are you kidding? You need to be self-talking yourself into being better and better. And I was like, well, if I do that, then I start to elevate myself over someone else who might need some. And I don't want to do that. I want to serve. I want to help. I want to come alongside. I want to be that brother that's mentioned in Ecclesiastes, to where when I think about the scene from Forrest Gump, Bubba comes up to him, hey, Forrest, you lean against me and I'll lean against you. That way we don't fall asleep with our head in the mud, right? So I want to be that person that can come along someone and help them through a tough time. And hopefully that the listening audience heard what you said, to not compare yourself with others. Do what God has given you the talent to do, and do it to the best of your ability.
Loves equally.
Regardless of what you think, regardless of what others think. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect, because whatever we've convinced ourselves of, I just don't think we're very good judges of character for the most part. Whatever somebody looks like on the surface, or you see them do certain things, you're like, I don't know if I would do that way. You have no idea what's going on in their heart until they choose to reveal it to you. And the moment they do, regardless of whatever's been done, it seems like the moment you know somebody best, you have no choice but to love them. But it's when we don't know somebody very well that it's easier to keep our distance and come up with, storylines on why they're that way. And And, but once they reveal their heart and we've given them a safe spot to do that, I mean, love is, kind of right back to the beginning. Just love kind of conquers all faults and shortcomings.
I believe it was Ted Lasso that said, "Be curious, not judgmental."
And now you're talking my religion, Ted Lasso. Now we're talking. No, seriously though, I think hopefully if anybody gets out of anything from our little discussion today, it's kind of right there with what Brent was ending on, is that we can lean on each other. And I think just by talking about our spirituality, regardless of what that is or what that looks like, just by having to articulate what you believe to somebody else, even if you don't agree with them or they don't agree with you, but having to put your beliefs to words I think, a super healthy exercise. And if you have safe people you can do that with, where they're not going to now condemn you because you believe a certain way or different, but you can share that and lean on each other. I think that's a very healthy thing for your spirituality, and I hope that that anybody that wants to have these kind of conversations, that's exactly what the peer team is here for. And certainly what our chaplain Brent is here for is somebody that just needs help reconnecting to their spirituality or to find their place in this world. And because we talk a lot about fitness, we talk a lot about nutrition, we talk a lot about mental wellness, but I think a key aspect also is our spirituality, that a good, happy, peaceful life has to have elements of those four things, and you leave spirituality out and it's not going to produce as good as fruit as you certainly could have. And so anything else that you guys want to cover?
No, I kind of hope, whoever listens to this understands that, like you said, we're not here to judge. I honestly want everybody to know I love them. I might have cussed you a time or two, I have my moments as well, but I honestly love everybody here. I don't want them to be alone. I want them to know they have somebody, just like almost I rely on God and have somebody. And so I hope I portray that feeling to them, that I'm here if they need me, I think all the peer team, all the brothers and sisters here at Logan Fire.
I think, though, one thing that I would like to leave with the membership that would be viewing this, and to anyone else that would be viewing it, relative to the department has a mission. And so I'm hopeful that I've mulled over it for the last several days, is like, what am I here for? Why am I doing this? Why have I been given this privilege to talk, to speak, to be involved with another group of firefighters, just another community? So like I mentioned before, we like alliterations, we like acrostics, we like things to help us remember. So they're my 5 R's relative to my mission, I believe. So at the request or whatever type of policy that comes out that I see, whoever the incident command calls, that I would respond to a call to be used at the discretion of the incident commander. So that'd be my first R. The second one is to, regardless of the situation, help to try to reduce the injury or reduce the crisis by entering into a loving, open conversation with people. Through that time, that my reaction and my reply, so my reaction, that it would be with love and compassion, and that the way that I would reply to anything in the given situation would be with truth and love. And with my last R is in to reproduce, or try to reproduce, and reproduce a similar situation, be it at the next emergency call or at the next station visit or wherever it happens to be. So through that God would get the glory, that he would be honored in anything that I would say or do.
Yeah, perfect. And thank you for saying that and bringing that to head there, and Seth, and just reminding everybody that we're here for you, and we want to just be a helpful resource. And and maybe just to close out with maybe what some of those emergencies might look like, so to those listening, if you've ever wondered about your purpose in life, if you've wondered about why God lets bad things happen to good people, if you've wondered about just suffering in general and how that works within some greater plan, if you've wondered about with as much as we see death in this service, what happens after death, and had any of those kind of soul searching questions, that's kind of a good spot to be in, to send out the call and start a conversation. It seems like those are pretty hard questions to answer on your own sometimes, but there's certainly people here that have wondered the same thing. And by talking about it together, I think we can find peace and healing and trying to find the answer and find a way to at least be at peace. And so appreciate you guys being here today and having these conversations, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Harding.
Thank you.